came home to find my entire life sitting in my son's driveway. 17 boxes, 4 plastic containers, 2 garment bags, and the old suitcase Samuel and I took on our last anniversary trip left on the concrete like garbage waiting for pickup day. My son had changed the locks while I was at church. The note taped to my suitcase said, "Sorry, Mom, there's no room for you anymore." He thought he'd made me homeless. He thought 68 years of living, loving, and sacrificing had left me with nothing but boxes and a broken heart. What Julian didn't know was that I had been quietly preparing for exactly this moment. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it moves you, subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. The taxi pulled up to my son's house at 4:17 in the afternoon on a Thursday, and the first thing I saw was my reading chair sitting on the front lawn. For a moment I thought I had the wrong address. I blinked. I looked at the house number on the mailbox, 412 Wisteria Lane. That was the right number. That was the white trim I had helped Julian paint last spring. That was the rosebush I had planted myself along the left side of the front walk 3 seasons ago, the week after Samuel's funeral, because I needed something living to tend to. That was my chair. The driver had already popped the trunk. I hadn't moved. "Ma'am, you need help with your bag." "No, thank you. I'm fine." I wasn't fine, but I have lived 68 years in the American South, and one thing my mother taught me before she taught me anything else was that you do not let strangers witness your unraveling. You hold yourself together long enough to get somewhere private. Then and only then do you fall apart. I paid the driver. I picked up my small carry-on, and I walked toward my son's house on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. That's when I started counting. 17 cardboard boxes, stacked in 2 uneven rows along the right side of the driveway. 4 large plastic storage containers, the kind with the gray lids that snap shut, piled near the garage door. 2 garment bags draped over the porch railing, my good church dresses visible through the plastic. And the suitcase, our suitcase. The navy blue Samsonite that Samuel and I had carried through the New Orleans airport for our 41st anniversary trip, 14 months before he got sick. It was sitting at the end of the walkway like a doorstop. I walked past the boxes slowly. I was looking for his photograph. Samuel's framed photograph, the one from our daughter Simone's wedding, where he is laughing at something just outside the frame, where he looks the most like himself, had sat on the corner shelf of my suite for 3 years. I had looked at it every single morning. I had talked to it on the hard nights. I had told him things I couldn't tell another living soul. I found the frame in the 3rd box from the left. It was lying face down. The glass hadn't cracked, but the corner of the frame had chipped. Someone had wrapped it in one single sheet of newspaper and dropped it sideways into a box marked miscellaneous. I stood in that driveway and held that frame against my chest for a long time. Then I turned and looked at the front door. The keypad had been replaced. The old one was ivory-colored plastic. This one was matte black, brushed steel, the kind you see on new construction. It was shiny. It still had the protective film on it. Whoever installed it hadn't bothered to peel the film off before they'd reset the code. I walked up the front porch steps and pressed my usual code anyway. Denied. I tried Samuel's birthday. Denied. I tried Nia's birthday, my granddaughter. 7 digits, the one Julian had programmed himself 2 years ago when he gave me my access. Denied. I stood on that porch for a moment and breathed. My son's car was in the driveway. His truck, the black F-250 he'd bought last year when Vanessa's business was doing well, was parked right there. 20 feet away from where I was standing, someone was home. I could see light through the curtains in the upstairs window. I heard the television. I did not knock. Something stopped me. Some old deep instinct, 40 years of working in hospital compliance, 40 years of learning that the moment you act on emotion in a confrontation is the moment you lose every advantage. You have something cold and quiet rose up in me, and I listened to it. I stepped off the porch. I walked to the left side of the house, to the ground floor window that looked into what had been my suite. The walls were cream now. I had painted them sage green 2 years ago because it reminded me of the color of the house Samuel and I raised our children in. The sage green was gone, the walls were cream, and they were fresh. I could smell the paint even through the window glass. Someone had moved fast. My bookshelf was gone. In its place was a decorative wooden sign with words painted in a script I didn't recognize. I pressed closer to the glass and squinted. It said, "Welcome, Patricia." Patricia is Vanessa's mother. I stood there for a long moment and looked at the room that used to be mine. The room I had paid $90,000 to build. The room where I had slept and read and cooked and existed for nearly 3 years. In the home of my son, who had invited me there and promised me I could stay for the rest of my life. Evelyn, I startled. It was my neighbor from 2 houses down, Mr. Alvarez, standing in his driveway with a leaf blower in his hand, watching me. "You okay?" "I'm fine, thank you, Raymond." He looked at the boxes. He looked at me. He was too kind to say anything else, and I was too proud to explain, so we just stood there for a moment in that polite southern silence that covers up more pain than people ever talk about. Then I walked back to the driveway and found the note. It was folded in half, taped to the handle of our old suitcase. Julian's handwriting blocky, tilted slightly to the right, the same handwriting that had signed birthday cards and school permission slips and Christmas lists for 43 years. Sorry, Mom, there's no room for you anymore. Vanessa's mother needs the downstairs suite. I hope you understand, Julian. I read it twice. The second time I read it slower. I have spent my entire career learning to read carefully. You do not survive 4 decades of compliance work by reading fast. You seed slow and you read everything, and you do not decide what a document means until you have understood every word of it. That note said 4 things, and none of them were what Julian thought they said. It said, "We planned this while you were away." It said, "We did not give you the chance to say no." It said, "We believe you have no options." And it said, "We are sorry enough to write it down, but not sorry enough to face you in person." My son had been scheduled to pick me up from the Savannah Hilton Head Airport at 2:15 that afternoon. I had texted him from the gate when the plane landed. I had called when I got through baggage claim. I had called again when I stood at the curb for 20 minutes and realized no one was coming. He had ignored every call for more than 5 hours. Because he knew exactly what I would find. He needed enough time to make sure the locks were changed and the boxes were packed before I could get here and stop it. I put the note in my purse, I took out my phone, and I began to photograph everything. I photographed the boxes numbered 1 through 17. I photographed the plastic containers. I photographed the garment bags. I photographed the keypad, the new one, still with its protective film. I photographed the window and the cream walls and the decorative sign that said, "Welcome, Patricia." I walked the perimeter of the property and photographed every point of entry. I photographed my reading chair on the front lawn and the chipped corner of Samuel's picture frame and the newspaper it had been wrapped in. Then I photographed the note front and back. The neighbors were watching. I'm sure, let them watch. I was not the person who had done something shameful today. When I had finished, I called Rachel Monroe. Rachel has been my attorney for 9 years. She helped me close on the house where Julian grew up, helped me process Samuel's estate after he died, and thank God helped me draft and record the occupancy agreement when I moved into Julian's home 2.5 years ago. She is 61 years old, small and precise, with reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck, and the kind of stillness that makes juries nervous. She answered on the second ring. "Rachel, I've been locked out." A pause. "Just one. Where are you right now?" "Standing in Julian's driveway. My things are in boxes. They changed the locks." "Did you photograph everything?" "Yes." "Don't touch the boxes. Don't knock on the door. Don't speak to Julian or Vanessa tonight, not one word, not even through the door." "Do you still have your copies of the occupancy agreement?" "Every page." "In the blue folder in my carry-on." "Then listen to me carefully." A pause. "Go to the other property." There was a moment of silence between us. "You think it's time, Evelyn?" Her voice was very calm. "They just made it time. Go tonight. I'll meet you there tomorrow morning at 9. I stood in that driveway for another 30 seconds after I hung up. I looked at the boxes. I looked at the new keypad on the front door. I looked at the rose bush I had planted, which was blooming pink along the front walkway, which would bloom next spring without me. Then I called a rideshare. I put my carry-on in the trunk, and I rode away. You need to understand something about who I was before that Thursday afternoon, because who I was is the reason what happened to me was possible. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 68 years old. I was born and raised in Chatham County, Georgia, the second of 4 children, the only one who went to college. I spent 40 years working in compliance at St. Catherine's Medical Center, which means I spent 40 years learning to read contracts, investigate discrepancies, document everything, and assume that the people on the other side of a deal were looking out for their own interests. I was very good at doing that at work. I was terrible at doing it inside my own family. Samuel and I were married for 41 years. He operated a small electrical repair company out of a shop on Montgomery Street. I worked my way up from entry-level billing coordinator to senior director of regulatory compliance. We were not wealthy, but we were careful the way people are careful when they have worked too hard for too long to throw anything away. We saved, we insured, we owned our home outright by the time Julian was in middle school. We raised 2 children, Julian, who is now 43 and works as a construction project manager, and Simone, who is 40 and has spent most of her adult life trying to figure out how to receive the most while doing the least. I say that not with bitterness, but with the resigned clarity of a woman who knows her children. Julian is not malicious by nature. He is weak. He has always chosen the path of least resistance, which is fine when the path leads somewhere decent, and catastrophic when the person choosing his direction for him has bad intentions. Vanessa is that person. Vanessa has bad intentions not because she is evil, but because she is desperate, and desperation in a person with no ethical guardrails looks a lot like evil when it's pointed at you. But I am getting ahead of myself. Samuel died 26 months before that Thursday. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed in October, gone by the following April. 6 months from diagnosis to funeral. 6 months is not enough time to say everything that needs to be said. It is not enough time to prepare, and when it was over, I was alone for the first time in 41 years, in a house we had bought together that suddenly had his name everywhere and his voice nowhere. 8 months after the funeral, Julian called me, "Mom, I've been thinking, the house is too big for you to manage alone. And we've got that downstairs space, we could build it out, make it a real suite, private entrance, everything. Nia would love having you closer. Vanessa and I talked, and we both want you here. I want you to hear how good that sounded." After 8 months of that house without Samuel, the silence where his coffee maker used to run, the closet where his shirts still smelled like him, the bed that was too large and too quiet and too everything, the idea of being somewhere with family, somewhere with my granddaughter, somewhere with noise and life, and a child who looked up when I walked into a room. I want you to hear how hard that offer was to turn down. I didn't turn it down, but Rachel made sure I was protected before I accepted it. "If you're putting money into someone else's property," she told me, sitting across from me at her desk with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, "then we make it legal, we record it, we put it in writing that everyone signs, and we make sure it says exactly what you think it says." "Rachel, it's my son, Evelyn." She looked at me the way a person looks at someone they care about who is about to do something they can't stop. "I'm not saying he'll hurt you. I'm saying that the law doesn't care about intentions. It cares about documentation. If something goes wrong, if Vanessa's business goes under, if they decide to sell, if Julian changes his mind or she changes it for him, what protects you is paper. Not love paper." I trusted her. I signed what she drafted. Julian and Vanessa signed it too. That document, 8 pages, recorded with the county, stated 3 things clearly. First, I had a permanent legal right to reside at 412 Wisteria Lane for the remainder of my life. Second, my financial contribution, $20,000 toward the mortgage and $90,000 toward construction of my suite, created a legal obligation of repayment if the arrangement was terminated by anyone other than me. Third, the arrangement could not be terminated without 60 days written notice, legal proceedings, and my express consent. Julian signed it at Rachel's conference table on a Tuesday afternoon. Vanessa signed it without looking up from her phone. I often wonder what she was texting that day. That agreement is what I was thinking about when I stood in the driveway, counting 17 boxes. Not the humiliation, not the grief, not even the rage that I was keeping very carefully packed down below the waterline. I was thinking they signed it, both of them, and I have every page. The first year in Julian's house was good, or good enough that I chose to call it good. I had my own space, a generous suite with a private entrance, a small kitchen, a sitting room where I could have Rachel over for lunch, and a bedroom where I could close my door and still feel like myself. Nia came downstairs after school most days. She would do her homework at my kitchen table while I cooked, and she would tell me things about her teacher, about the girl who was mean to her at recess, about the book she was reading, about a dream she'd had, the way children tell things to grandmothers that they never quite tell their parents, because grandmothers are softer and less frightening and have no power over bedtimes. I lived for those afternoons, but Vanessa had a way of being pleasant, the way some salespeople are pleasant, completely, exhaustingly, and in a way that left you feeling managed rather than liked. She kissed my cheek when I came upstairs for Sunday dinner. She asked about my doctor's appointments. She said, "We're so glad you're here," in a tone that was warm and practiced, and performed for whoever happened to be listening. When no one else was listening, she was something else. The first time she came into my suite without knocking, I thought it was an accident. She walked in while I was reading, holding a measuring tape, explaining that she was just checking the dimensions for some new shelving ideas. "Vanessa, I'd appreciate a knock." "Oh, of course." "Evelyn, I always forget." Smile, turn gone. She was reorganizing my kitchen. I came back from my Thursday morning church group to find that she had rearranged my cabinets, moved my medication to a different shelf, and inexplicably replaced my coffee maker with a new one still in its box. The old one was taking up too much counter space. "I found you a sleeker model. I like my coffee maker. The new one makes better coffee. I promise I put the old one in the garage in case you want it back." She said it like she was doing me a favor. She said it like I had no preferences worth consulting. The third time she had opened a piece of my financial mail. I came home from the grocery store to find an envelope from my brokerage on the kitchen counter, opened, refolded, and set on top of a grocery list in a way that suggested nothing unusual had happened. I stood in my kitchen holding that envelope for a very long time. When I went upstairs, she was on the phone. I waited. When she finished, I said quietly, "Vanessa, that was my mail. Oh, it came through the main slot by accident. I wasn't going to snoop, I just didn't realize it was yours until after. It had my name on the front." "I know. I'm sorry." She tilted her head slightly. "Is everything okay with your accounts?" I noticed it was from Fidelity. That was the moment I knew. I did not say anything else. I went back downstairs And I called Rachel and I said, I need you to pay attention to something. For the next 18 months, I paid attention. I am good at paying attention. 40 years of compliance work will do that to a person. You learn to see the shape of something before it becomes visible to anyone else. You learn to notice not just what people do, but what they almost do, the emails they start and don't send, the conversations they stop when you walk into the room, the questions they ask that are really about something other than what they're asking about. Vanessa's business started losing clients about 14 months into my time in that house. I know this not because anyone told me, but because I could hear her on the phone through the ceiling of my suite. Her office was directly above my sitting room. She had always been loud on calls, authoritative, declarative, the kind of voice that commands rooms. As the months went on, her calls got quieter, more closed door, more clipped. One morning I heard her say clearly, "Through the floor, the house has enough equity. We just need Evelyn's claim removed." I sat very still in my chair and let that sentence land. Then I got out my notebook and wrote it down with the date and the time. Shortly after that, Simone began calling me more frequently. My daughter and I have always had a complicated relationship. She is charming and clever and fundamentally self-interested in a way she has never quite been able to hide from me. Even when she was young, her new interest in my well-being had a particular flavor I recognized. Concern that was really calculation. "Mom, I've been thinking, have you looked into any of those active adult communities? There's a beautiful one out near Skidaway Island. A friend of mine's mother went there and she loves it. I'm fine where I am." "Simone, no, you seem tired lately." "Are you sleeping okay? I'm 68. I have days when I'm tired." "That's not a symptom. Of course not. I just worry." She had not worried much about me in the 4 years before I moved in with Julian. But suddenly she was worried. Suddenly Vanessa was suggesting that I extend my church retreat from 4 days to a full week, that the longer time away might be good for my spirit, that she would even cover the change fee herself. Vanessa paid $112 to change my retreat reservation, $112 to buy herself a week without me in the house. I thought about that on the plane to Charleston. I thought about what $112 was worth to a woman running a business that owed, I would later learn, $170,000 in outstanding vendor payments and bank debt. $112 was a very small investment for what she was planning. While I was in Charleston attending morning prayer services and evening devotional groups, and quiet meals with women I had known from my church for 30 years, my family was busy. Vanessa was meeting with movers and instructing them that her mother-in-law had voluntarily relocated and that her belongings simply needed to be organized. Julian was packing my suite. His hands were in my drawers, lifting my clothes, lowering my dishes into boxes, carrying Samuel's photograph out the door. He changed the keypad code on the front door and the side entrance. He arranged for the cream paint to be ordered and delivered. Simone was calling 2 women from my church congregation, women who knew me casually, women whose goodwill she was exploiting, and asking them, in a voice of careful concern, whether they had noticed any signs of confusion or memory difficulty in me. She told them she was worried about Mom and wondered if anyone else had noticed anything. And Vanessa was sending emails. She was sending emails to a loan officer at their bank, explaining that once I was permanently relocated, Julian could persuade me to release my claim against the property. She was working through the paperwork to refinance the house, which required my occupancy agreement to be removed from the county records, and she needed my signature to do it. She also made a different arrangement. She promised Simone $30,000 to be paid from my expected inheritance in exchange for Simone's cooperation in establishing that I might not be competent to manage my own affairs. Let me say that plainly so it lands the way it should. My daughter agreed to tell people I was losing my mind in exchange for $30,000, not because she believed it, but because she wanted the money, and Vanessa needed the credibility, and together they decided that the simplest obstacle between them and what they wanted was my dignity. I arrived at my destination the night they thought they had left me with nothing. 18 months earlier, I had purchased a riverside cottage through a family trust. It is a modest house, 900 square feet, 2 bedrooms, a small covered porch that faces the water. I had paid for it in cash, through the trust, through a transaction that appeared nowhere in my personal financial records. I had furnished it quietly over many months, a small move here, a box of kitchen things there. I had told no one, not Julian, not Simone, not the neighbors, not the women at church. I had told Rachel because Rachel needed to know for the legal structure, and I had told Samuel's photograph, which counts for something even if it doesn't count legally. I had prepared that cottage the way you prepare a fire extinguisher, hoping you will never need it, making sure it works if you do. That Thursday evening I unlocked the blue front door. I carried my carry-on inside. I turned on the kitchen light, and I put Samuel's photograph, the one from Simone's wedding, the one with the chipped frame, the one that had been lying face down in a box marked miscellaneous. I put it on the mantel, upright, facing the room. Well, I said to him, here we are. The silence in that house was not the silence of Julian's house, which had always felt like held breath, like the quiet of a room where people are not saying things. This silence was mine. I had purchased it and maintained it and arrived at it on my own terms, and it felt completely different from every other silence I had lived in since Samuel died. My son believed he had made me homeless. He had actually set me free. But before I could rest, before I could begin to understand what had just happened to me and what I was going to do about it, I had one more thing to do. I sat down at the kitchen table with my blue folder. I opened it. I took out every page of the occupancy agreement, all 8 pages, both signatures, the county recording stamp on the front page, and I laid them on the table in order. Then I took out Julian's note. I put it next to the agreement, and for a long time I sat there looking at both of them. One was written by a woman who had spent 40 years protecting herself. The other was written by a son who had spent 43 years underestimating her. I thought about what Rachel had said 9 years ago. When we first started working together, she had said, "The most powerful position in any negotiation is the one where you are willing to walk away from what the other person thinks you cannot survive without." I had walked away. Now I needed to decide what to do with where I'd walked to. I closed the folder. I turned off the kitchen light. And I slept in my own house, in my own bed, under my own roof, better than I had slept in 18 months. Rachel arrived at the cottage at 8:57 the next morning. I know the exact time because I had been awake since 5, sitting at my kitchen table with the blue folder open and a legal pad beside it, making a list of every financial transaction I could remember from the last 2.5 years. When her car turned into the driveway, I had already filled 11 pages. She came inside without ceremony. She did not ask how I was feeling. She did not hug me and say she was sorry. That is one of the things I love most about Rachel Monroe. She understands that some situations are not helped by sympathy, and that what I needed from her that morning was not comfort. It was strategy. She sat across from me. She put her briefcase on the table. She looked at the 11 pages of notes and the blue folder and the empty coffee cup beside my elbow, and she said, "How long have you been up?" "Since 5. Have you eaten anything?" "I'm not hungry, Evelyn." She looked at me steadily. "You need to be sharp for what comes next. Go make yourself some toast while I read through your notes." That is not a suggestion. I made the toast. I ate it standing at the counter because I could not sit still. And while I ate, Rachel read through everything I had written, quietly, with her reading glasses on the end of her nose and a pen in her hand that she used to underline things. When she finished, she sat back in her chair and looked at me over the top of her glasses. "Evelyn, this is worse than a family dispute. I know, this is coordinated financial exploitation. What Vanessa did, the movers, the locks, the mail, the calls to Simone, this isn't impulsive. Someone planned this carefully over a significant amount of time. I know that too. The bank emails? I don't have them yet. But I overheard enough, and I know where to start looking." She was quiet for a moment. Then she uncapped her pen, turned to a fresh page, and said, "Tell me everything, from the beginning. Don't skip the parts that seem small." So I told her. I told her about the mail, about the measuring tape, about the coffee maker that appeared in my kitchen without my consent. I told her about the calls through the ceiling, about the phrase I had written down 18 months ago, "The house has enough equity. We just need Evelyn's claim removed," still sitting in my notebook with the date and the time beside it. I told her about Simone's calls and the questions about assisted living communities. I told her about Vanessa paying the change fee for my retreat reservation, and how I had sat on that plane to Charleston thinking about what $112 was worth to a woman with $170,000 in outstanding debt. Rachel wrote everything down. When I finished, she set down her pen, and she said, "I need you to understand something. Everything they did was designed to achieve one result: to get your signature on a release of your occupancy claim. They need that release to refinance the house. Without it, the bank won't touch the property, and without the refinance, Vanessa's business is finished." So the boxes were the first step. They made you homeless, or they thought they did, because they needed you to feel desperate. When a person is desperate, they accept conditions they would never accept otherwise. Julian was going to call you eventually and offer you a solution. Something like a nice room at an assisted living facility, paid for by them, very generous, very concerned, and all you'd have to do in exchange is sign a simple little document releasing your claim against the property. I sat with that for a moment. And Simone was the insurance policy. If you refused, or if you asked too many questions, they needed someone to suggest just gently, just to the right people, that maybe Evelyn wasn't quite herself lately, that her judgment might be slipping, that it might be time for someone else to help her manage her affairs. The words landed like something cold pressed against the back of my neck. They were going to question my competency. They already started. "I made some calls this morning. 2 women from your congregation were contacted last week by your daughter. She asked them about memory lapses, about confusion. She used the word concerned 4 times in one phone conversation. 4 times 4. I got up. I walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the river for a moment. Not because there was anything to see, just because I needed somewhere to put my eyes that wasn't Rachel's face, because if I kept looking at Rachel's face I was going to cry, and I was not ready to cry yet. There was too much left to do before I could afford that. My daughter had called women from my church and asked them to confirm that I was losing my mind, not because she believed it, but because someone had offered her $30,000, and she had looked at that number and then looked at her mother and decided the number was worth more. Evelyn, I'm fine, you don't have to be fine. Yes, I do. I turned back from the window. What do we need? What we needed was evidence, and gathering it took 2 full days. Rachel had a paralegal named Marcus who was young and methodical and very good at finding things in public records that other people assumed were buried. Within 24 hours, Marcus had pulled the county property records, the refinancing application that Vanessa had submitted to the bank, which listed my occupancy claim as an encumbrance to be removed, and 3 months of business filings for Vanessa's company, Lux Event Group LLC. The filings told a story that Vanessa had been hiding from everyone. Lux Event Group had lost 4 major clients in the previous 8 months. 2 had filed formal complaints with the Better Business Bureau, alleging that deposits had been taken for events that were never properly staffed, that vendors had arrived late or not at all, that invoices had been paid by clients and somehow not forwarded to the actual vendors. There were 2 small claims judgments against the company, both from florists. There was a demand letter from a caterer for $12,000. There was a letter from their primary commercial bank stating that the existing line of credit would not be extended and that the current balance, $43,000, was due within 60 days. The total outstanding obligation, when Marcus added everything up, was $168,000 against a business that had had no revenue in 90 days. I sat at my kitchen table and looked at those numbers, and something settled into place in my chest. Not satisfaction, not quite, but the particular feeling of a person who has been told they are imagining things and then discovers documentation that proves they were not. I had not been paranoid. I had not been difficult. I had not been making something out of nothing. I had been right. There's something else, Marcus said. He was sitting across from me with his laptop, and he turned it to show me an email thread that had been obtained through the bank's loan application file. Loan applications are, in certain circumstances, public record. Rachel had known exactly how to request it. The email was from Vanessa to a loan officer named Derek Foss. It was dated 11 days before my church retreat began. It said, "We're moving forward with the sweet transition this month. Once Evelyn is permanently relocated, Julian will work with her on the release paperwork. She responds better to him than to me. We expect to have her signature within 30 days of the transition." I read it 3 times. She responds better to him than to me. They had assigned roles. Julian was the gentle one, the one who would hold my hand and talk about family in the future, while Vanessa managed the paperwork in the background. They had divided me between them like a problem to be solved, and they had done it 11 days before they packed a single box. "Can we use this?" I asked Rachel. "Not only can we use it, it establishes intent. This isn't a misunderstanding about housing arrangements. Evelyn, this is documented evidence of a coordinated plan to remove a legally protected resident from a property in order to obtain her signature under duress. That is not a family disagreement. That is a civil matter, and potentially a criminal one. Potentially criminal. Financial exploitation of a senior adult is a felony in the state of Georgia." The room was very quiet for a moment. "I don't want Julian arrested. I know you don't. But I want you to understand what you're holding. Because when you walk into that room with them, you need to know exactly how serious this is so that they know you know." Julian called on the 2nd day. I was sitting on the cottage porch when my phone rang, and I looked at his name on the screen, and I felt something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, something that was both at once, braided together so tightly I couldn't separate them. I let it ring 4 times. Then I answered, "Mom." His voice had the particular quality I had heard from him since he was a child, the voice he used when he had done something wrong and wanted to talk around it before he admitted to it. Careful, slightly higher than normal, trying to casual when nothing was casual. "I've been trying to reach you. You have my number. I called yesterday." I know, a pause. "Where are you staying?" "I've been worried." The audacity of that sentence hit me somewhere behind the sternum. He had personally changed the locks on the house. He had stood in my suite and lifted my belongings into boxes. He had left his note taped to Samuel's suitcase and then ignored my calls for 5 hours, and now he was telling me he had been worried. "I'm safe, Mom." "I need to explain what happened, Julian." "Stop." He stopped. "I'm not going to have this conversation on the phone. If you want to talk, it will be at Rachel Monroe's office. You, Vanessa, anyone else you think needs to be there. Rachel will set the time." "Rachel, Mom, do we really need attorneys involved? This is a family situation. We can. You changed the locks while I was at church. You packed my husband's photograph face down in a box marked miscellaneous. You left me a note. I kept my voice level the way you keep your hands steady when you're carrying something that could spill. This stopped being a family situation the moment you made it a legal one. I'll have Rachel's office call you with a time." Silence on his end. "Vanessa's not going to be comfortable with that. That is not my concern." Another silence. Longer. I could hear him breathing. I could almost hear him doing the calculation, figuring out whether he could still manage me, whether the gentle approach would work, whether I was upset enough to be volatile or calm enough to be handled. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay, Mom, whatever you need." I ended the call. My hands were not shaking. I want to be clear about that because I think sometimes people imagine that confronting the people who have hurt you looks like falling apart. It doesn't. At least it didn't for me. My hands were completely steady. My voice had been completely steady. The shaking, if there was any, was happening somewhere much deeper than my hands, in a place where 68 years of choosing peace over conflict were straining against something that had finally had enough. I went back inside and told Rachel to set the meeting. There was one more piece of the picture that I did not have yet. I had the agreement, the bank email, the business filings, the recordings, the photographs. I had enough to walk into that meeting and win. But I felt like I was seeing a shape clearly except for one corner, and the corner I couldn't quite see was Simone. I knew she had called the women from my church. I knew Vanessa had promised her money, but I didn't have it in writing. I didn't have the message, the number, the explicit confirmation of what she had agreed to do and what she had been offered for it. I called Marcus. "Is there any way to find out what was actually said between Vanessa and Simone?" Text messages, emails, anything in writing depends on what they used. If it was email and either of them put it in a document they filed anywhere, a loan application, a business record, anything that's part of a financial transaction, then yes. If it was a private text conversation, no, not without their phones. I thought for a moment. Simone was meticulous about email. She had always been a person who documented things not because she was organized, but because she wanted receipts. She wanted proof that whatever went wrong was someone else's fault. She sent emails instead of having conversations so that she could forward them later if she needed to. Try her business email. She does freelance interior consulting. She has a professional account. Marcus looked. It took him most of an afternoon. What he found was not an email from Simone to Vanessa. It was an email from Simone to a friend of hers, a woman named Dana, who I had met twice at family gatherings, written 4 days before my retreat ended. It had been sent from Simone's professional account to Dana's, which was connected to a design firm that had submitted a proposal as part of one of Vanessa's events, which made it technically part of the business record trail. The email said, "V is handling the housing thing this week while E is away. I already talked to Patrice and Carol from the church, just planted some seeds. Nothing explicit. V says once the house is refinanced, I'll get the 30 before end of year. It's not ideal, but E has more than enough, and honestly, she'd rather give it to Julian anyway." Patrice and Carol. 2 women from my congregation. My daughter had called them by name and described questioning their faith in my mental clarity as planting seeds, and then told a near stranger that I had more than enough and would rather give my money to Julian anyway, as if she had conducted a survey of my preferences and come back with data. I read the email twice, slowly, then I put it in the blue folder. I did not call Simone. I did not send her a message. I did not warn her that I had found it. I simply placed it at the back of the folder, behind the bank emails and the business filings and the occupancy agreement, and I went to bed. The night before the meeting, I could not sleep. That is not unusual. I have not slept well since Samuel died. But that night the insomnia had a different quality, not the heavy, grief-soaked kind that pulls you down into a half-waking state where you keep reaching for someone who isn't there, but something sharper, something almost electric. I lay in the dark and thought about Julian at 7 years old, sitting at the kitchen table with a spelling test he had failed, trying to convince me that the teacher had marked something wrong that was actually right. I thought about Julian at 17, calling me from a friend's house at 2 in the morning, his voice small and frightened because he had made a choice and it had gone badly and he needed someone to come get him. I thought about Julian at 31, calling me from the hospital when Nia was born, crying in a way grown men only cry when they have just been handed something they cannot believe they are allowed to keep. I loved my son. I want to be clear about that. I loved him the way you love something that is part of you, that grew from you, that carries your history and your husband's eyes and your mother's stubbornness in some combination that is entirely his own. Love like that does not switch off, not even when the person you love has packed your belongings into 17 boxes and left your husband's photograph face down in a cardboard box marked miscellaneous. But love has to be honest to be love, and the honest truth was that my son had made a choice. Not because he was forced, not because he had no options, but because he was afraid, and being afraid had always made Julian reach for the easiest path available, and the easiest path Vanessa had offered him was one that ran directly over me. He had made that choice, and I was going to let him live with what it cost him. That was not cruelty, that was respect, the respect of treating a 43-year-old man like an adult who was responsible for his own decisions, rather than a child whose consequences I would absorb to protect him from the weight of them. Around 2 in the morning, I got up and went to the kitchen. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and I sat at the table with the blue folder, and I went through it one more time, not because I needed to. I knew every page, I knew every line of every document. I had read the occupancy agreement so many times in the previous 2 days that I could have recited it in my sleep. I went through it because I needed to hold it. Because sometimes the thing that steadies you is not a plan or a strategy but a physical object, a folder, a stack of paper, a signed agreement that says, "You are not imagining this. It is real, it is documented, and it belongs to you." Samuelson would have understood that. He had been the same way with his equipment at the shop. He checked everything before a job. Not because he expected to find something wrong, but because the act of checking was itself the thing that made him confident. He said it once while I was watching him go through a checklist for an electrical inspection, and he looked up and caught me watching and said, "A prepared person is a calm person. Evie, check your work before you need it, and when you need it you won't be afraid." He was right about most things. He was right about that. I closed the folder, I finished my tea. I went back to bed, and this time I slept. The morning of the meeting, I dressed carefully. I want to say that plainly because I think it matters. Some people might read that sentence and think it is a small thing of vanity, an affectation, a woman fussing over her appearance when she should be focused on what is coming. But dressing carefully is not vanity, it is armor. It is the deliberate construction of the version of yourself that you need to be in the room you are about to enter. I wore navy, a wool crepe blazer I had bought 3 years ago for a compliance conference in Atlanta, paired with slacks I had pressed the night before. Pearl earrings that had been my mother's, my reading glasses on a plain chain around my neck, low heels because I intended to be comfortable, and because comfort and confidence are not as separate as people think. I looked at myself in the mirror before I left. I looked like a woman who had spent 40 years knowing what she was doing. That was exactly who I needed to be. Rachel's office is on Drayton Street, on the second floor of a building that still has the original heart pine floors and plaster crown molding from the 1880s. The conference room looks out over a small courtyard. There is a long oval table, 8 chairs, a credenza along one wall with a water pitcher and glasses arranged precisely at equal intervals. When I arrived, Rachel was already there. Marcus was at the credenza with a notepad. The documents were stacked on the table in the order Rachel and I had decided on, not randomly, but deliberately sequenced, the way you sequence evidence when you want each piece to land before the next one arrives. "How are you feeling?" Rachel asked. "Ready, good. They'll be here in 10 minutes. They arrived in 8. Julian came through the door first, which surprised me. I had expected Vanessa to lead, because Vanessa was the one who had engineered this, and she was the kind of person who liked to control entrances. But Julian walked in first, and he looked at me before he looked at anything else in the room, and what I saw on his face was not the expression of a man who had done something wrong and was trying to hide it. It was the expression of a man who had done something wrong and had been looking at it for 2 days and could not look away from it. He looked terrible. If I am being honest, he had not slept. His eyes were red at the edges, and he was holding his jaw in that tight, compressed way he had had since he was a teenager, when he was trying not to show that he was falling apart. He looked at me and said, "Mom," just that one word. I looked back at him and said nothing. Vanessa came in behind him. Then Simone, who would not meet my eyes, and behind them all, moving slowly, was a woman I had not expected. Vanessa's mother, Patricia, a small woman in her late 60s with careful white hair and a handbag held in both hands, who looked around the conference room with the expression of someone who has arrived at a situation she does not entirely understand. They sat down. Vanessa positioned herself at Julian's right, her chair angled slightly toward her hand near his arm on the table. A staging choice. She wanted to appear united, supportive, the concerned wife rather than the architect. Simone sat to Julian's left and folded her hands on the table and looked at a point somewhere between the credenza and the window. I sat across from my son and folded my own hands and waited. Rachel opened the meeting. "Thank you all for coming. I want to establish at the outset that this is a legal consultation, not a family mediation Evelyn has asked me to facilitate because there are documented legal matters that require formal discussion. Everything said in this room may be referenced in subsequent proceedings." "Does everyone understand?" Vanessa said. "I think we all just want to talk through this as a family and find a practical solution." "That's noted," Rachel said. "We'll begin." Vanessa reached across the table before Rachel could continue. She had a folder of her own thinner than mine, but she had come with something, which told me she had prepared. She opened it and smoothed the top page and said, in the careful voice people use when they want cruelty to sound like concern, "We've all been worried about Evelyn. I think everyone in this room knows that the last few years have been very difficult for her, and that grief affects people in ways they don't always recognize in themselves. Julian was looking at the table. Simone was looking at her hands. Vanessa continued. I've spoken with a few people who know Evelyn, people who care about her and see her regularly, and there have been some concerns raised about her ability to manage, and I say this with so much love and care, some concerns about her ability to make decisions that are truly in her best interest. She paused. She looked at me with an expression of practiced tenderness. We're not saying anything is wrong. We're just saying we want to make sure she's getting the support she needs, and that before any legal discussions happen, we want the family to be aligned on what's best for her well-being. The room was very quiet. I let it be quiet for a moment. I let the words sit in the air where she had put them. I let everyone around the table hear them and sit with them. Then I opened my blue folder. I took out the FRA agreement, not the occupancy agreement, not the bank emails, but the one I had added 3 months earlier, the one I had requested quietly and kept in the folder precisely for a moment like this one. I placed it on the table and slid it to the center where everyone could see it. It was a 12-page cognitive assessment conducted by Dr. Patricia Wells at the Memory and Aging Center at Memorial Health. Completed 92 days ago, signed, stamped, and notarized. 3 months ago, I said. I noticed that people were beginning to ask questions about my memory. I'm a compliance professional. When I notice a pattern, I document it. I had a full neuropsychological evaluation, reasoning, executive function, short and long-term memory, judgment, processing speed. Dr. Wells is one of the most respected specialists in her field in this region. I tapped the last page. The summary page, normal function across all assessed domains, no indication of cognitive decline, no recommendation for intervention or oversight of any kind, silence. Then I looked directly at Vanessa and said, you investigated whether I was confused. You should have investigated whether I was prepared. And I reached for the next document. The cognitive assessment landed in the center of that table like a stone dropped into still water. I watched the ripples move across every face in the room. Julian's jaw tightened. He looked at the document, then looked away, then looked back as if he could not decide which direction was safer. Simone's hands, which had been folded neatly on the table, came apart. She pressed one palm flat against the wood and the other into her lap, and she looked at the assessment with an expression I recognized from when she was 11 years old and had been caught in a lie she had not prepared an exit for. Vanessa did not move. That was the most telling thing. A person who is genuinely surprised moves. They lean forward. They reach for the paper, their eyes go wide or their shoulders drop or something in their body responds before their mind can manage it. Vanessa simply sat there, and the stillness of her told me that she was recalibrating. She was not surprised. She was adjusting. Patricia, Vanessa's mother, looked at the document and then looked at her daughter, and something shifted in her face that I filed away without commenting on. Rachel let the silence do its work for a full 15 seconds. In a courtroom, 15 seconds of silence is an eternity. In a conference room with 4 people who have just had the first piece of their narrative dismantled, it is long enough for doubt to take root. Then Rachel placed the second document on the table. The occupancy agreement. All 8 pages fanned slightly so that the county recording stamp on the front page was visible and the signature page was facing up. Julian's signature, Vanessa's signature, the date, the notary seal. This agreement was recorded with the Chatham County Clerk of Superior Court on March 14th. 2 years ago, Rachel said. It establishes 3 things. First, that Evelyn Carter has a permanent legal right of occupancy at 412 Wisteria Lane for the duration of her life. Second, that her financial contribution of $210,000 creates a repayment obligation in the event the arrangement is terminated. Third, that termination of the arrangement requires 60 days written notice, mutual consent, and formal legal proceedings. Vanessa uncrossed her legs and recrossed them. Left over right, then right over left. We weren't terminating anything, she said carefully. We were making a temporary accommodation for a family emergency. Patricia needed housing, and Vanessa, Rachel's voice was completely pleasant. A recorded legal agreement is not a temporary accommodation. It is a legal instrument. What occurred on the evening of September 9th constitutes an unlawful eviction under Georgia law. The locks were changed without notice. Personal property was removed without consent. Access was denied to a legally recognized resident. Those are not family decisions. Those are civil violations. The boxes were still on the property. We weren't removing her things. They were on the driveway, I said. Vanessa looked at me. We were organizing. Samuel's photograph was face down in a box marked miscellaneous. I kept my voice the way Rachel had kept hers. Completely pleasant, completely steady. His coffee mug was wrapped in one dish towel. My reading chair was on the front lawn. Julian's note said there was no room for me anymore. What word would you like to use for that, Vanessa? Because I've been struggling to find one other than what it was. Julian made a sound. Not a word. A sound low compressed, the kind of sound a person makes when something hits them in a place they had been trying to protect. The locks, Rachel continued, as if there had been no interruption. Security footage from the neighbor's camera across the street, which Evelyn obtained legally, and with the neighbor's full cooperation, shows Evelyn Carter changing the keypad on the front entrance at 2:47 in the afternoon on September 9th. He was scheduled to collect Evelyn from the airport at 2:15. Julian's head came up. He changed the locks before her flight landed. The room was completely silent. Julian looked at me. His mouth opened and then closed without producing a word. And what I saw on his face in that moment was not anger and was not calculation. It was shame. Raw, unmanaged, the kind of shame that has nowhere to go because there is no version of the facts that makes it look like something else. Julian, I said quietly, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. He looked back down at the table. Vanessa's voice when it came had shifted register. The careful tenderness was gone. In its place was something more controlled, more lawyerly, more like the voice she used on phone calls when she knew a vendor was going to push back. The agreement was signed under certain assumptions about our living situation that have since changed substantially. Any reasonable court would consider, the third document, Rachel said. Marcus placed it on the table, the bank correspondence, the refinancing application, the email from Vanessa to Derek Foss, the loan officer dated 11 days before my retreat began. Vanessa saw her own name at the top of the email and went very still. Rachel read the relevant section aloud, not the whole thing, just the sentence that mattered. Once Evelyn is permanently relocated, Julian will work with her on the release paperwork. She responds better to him than to me. We expect to have her signature within 30 days of the transition. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence from the one before. The first silence had been shock. This one was the silence of people who have realized they are in a room where the walls have been moved without their knowledge, and the exits are not where they thought they were. Simone turned and looked at Vanessa. It was a small movement, a quick one, barely perceptible, but I caught it. It was the look of a person who has just understood that the person they bet on is not holding the cards they claim to have. That email, Vanessa said, and her voice had gone flat and careful, the way voices go when the speaker is choosing every word with both hands, was a private communication to a financial professional about a legitimate refinancing process. It's being taken out of context. It was submitted as part of a refinancing application, Rachel said, which makes it a matter of record. And the context is the application itself. She placed the application on top of the email. Lux Event Group LLC is listed on this application as a business interest requiring debt consolidation. The outstanding obligations of that business, $168,000, are cited as the reason for the refinancing request. The property at 412 Wisteria Lane is the collateral. And Evelyn Carter's recorded occupancy claim is listed here. Rachel pointed to a specific line on the third page as an encumbrance to be removed prior to closing. Patricia said, "What does that mean?" Her voice was quiet and careful. She had been sitting to Vanessa's right without speaking for 20 minutes, and the sound of her voice made everyone at the table recalibrate. "It means," Rachel said, and she spoke to Patricia with the same directness she used with everyone, because Rachel Monroe does not condescend, that the reason Evelyn was removed from the house was not to create space for you. It was to remove a legal claim that was preventing your daughter's company from using the house as collateral for a loan. Patricia turned and looked at Vanessa. Vanessa did not look back. "I never asked to move there permanently," Patricia said. Her voice was quiet, but her words were precise. "Vanessa called me and said Julian had offered the room, and that it would only be for a few months while I figured out my next steps. She did not tell me anyone was being displaced. She did not tell me any of this, Mom," Vanessa said. "She packed someone out of their home to make room for me, and she did not tell me." Patricia set her handbag on the table with a small, definitive sound. "I would not have agreed to that. I want that said clearly. I would not have agreed to that, Mom. It's complicated." "It is not complicated." Patricia's voice did not rise. "It did not need to. A woman was living in that house legally. You removed her to use her home as a bank account. That is not complicated. That is wrong." Julian put his face in his hands. "I watched my son sitting there with his face hidden, and I made myself feel the full weight of what I was feeling without letting it change what I had decided. Because the truth is that watching Julian fall apart did something to me that I had not fully anticipated. Not because it made me doubt my decisions, but because it reminded me, all over again, that he was not a villain. He was a weak man who had been afraid, and fear had made him capable of something he would spend a long time reckoning with. That is almost worse than malice in some ways. Malice at least has the dignity of intention. Weakness just stumbles into cruelty and then looks around wondering how it got there. But I kept my hands folded, I kept my face steady, because I had not come to that room to comfort my son. I had come to tell the truth, and the truth does not pause for grief." Rachel waited for Patricia to finish. Then she looked at Vanessa and said, "The fourth document. This was the one I had not told Rachel I had added until the night before the meeting. I had called her at 9 o'clock the evening prior and told her what Marcus had found." She had been quiet for a moment and then said, in the measured way that meant she was controlling her reaction, "Put it at the back of the sequence. After everything else has landed, let it be the last thing." Marcus placed it on the table. A single printed sheet, the email from Simone to her friend Dana, sent from Simone's professional account, obtained through the business record trail. I watched my daughter's face as Rachel read the relevant sections aloud. "V is handling the housing thing this week while E is away." Rachel paused. "I already talked to Patrice and Carol from the church, just planted some seeds. Nothing explicit." Another pause. "Says once the house is refinanced, I'll get the 30 before end of year." Simone's color drained so completely and so fast that I thought for a moment she might be physically unwell. 30 refers to $30,000, Rachel said. Promised by Vanessa Carter to Simone Brooks in exchange for Simone's cooperation in establishing doubt about Evelyn's cognitive and decision-making capacities. Nobody said anything. Simone's mouth opened. She looked at me. She looked at her hands. She looked back at me. "I was worried about you," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I let the silence answer her for a moment. Just a moment, then I said, "Simone, you called Patrice and Carol by name. You described it as planting seeds, and then you told a woman you barely know that your mother has more than enough money and would rather give it to Julian anyway." I did not raise my voice. I had not raised my voice once in that room. That is not worry. That is inventory. Her eyes filled. She was going to cry. I recognized the particular way her face moved when she was about to cry, the small tightening around her mouth, the way her chin lifted slightly as if she were trying to keep something down. I had seen it 1,000 times. I knew it the way I knew every expression she owned. I did not soften, not because I did not love her, but because softening was what she was counting on. Tears had always been Simone's final argument, and they had always worked on me, and today they were not going to work on me, and she needed to know that. "I want $30,000 to appear so badly," I said, "that you were willing to tell strangers I was losing my mind to make it happen. I have to live with knowing that about you. I imagine you'll have to live with knowing it about yourself." Julian took his hands away from his face. His eyes were red. He looked at his sister, then at his wife, then at me, and the look on his face was the look of a man who is standing in the wreckage of a choice he made and is only now seeing the full scope of it. "I want to say something," he said. His voice cracked on the word something. He cleared his throat, tried again. "I want to say something, and I don't want to. I'm not going to make excuses. I need you to know that I'm not going to make excuses." I looked at my son. "I knew it was wrong," Julian said. "I want to be clear about that. I knew it was wrong from the first box I packed. I told myself it was for the family, for the business, for the house, but those are just words I use so I wouldn't have to look at what I was actually doing." He paused. He was pressing the heels of his hands against the edge of the table, and I could see his knuckles. "I carried your things out of your home. Mom, I packed Samuel's picture. I changed the lock. I knew you were coming home and I let it happen anyway because I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" I asked. "Afraid of losing the house. Afraid of the business going under. Afraid if." He stopped, looked at Vanessa. Something passed between them that I could not entirely read. "Afraid of what would happen if I said no." The room held that sentence for a long moment. Then Rachel said quietly, "Julian, I need to make sure you understand the legal position you're in." He turned to her. "What occurred on September 9th constitutes unlawful eviction under Georgia Code. What Vanessa planned and what Simone participated in constitutes coordinated financial exploitation of a senior adult. In the state of Georgia, that is a felony offense. Evelyn has the documentation to file a civil suit for breach of contract, unlawful eviction, and financial damages. She also has the documentation to make a criminal referral to the appropriate authorities. I want you to understand that clearly before we continue." Vanessa said, "You're not going to do that." I looked at her. "You're not going to file criminal charges against your own son, Vanessa." Rachel's voice was completely neutral. "What Evelyn chooses to do is Evelyn's decision. What I'm doing right now is making sure everyone in this room understands what the options are, so that no one leaves here claiming they weren't informed. This is a family disagreement. Stop saying that. It was Patricia." Her voice had the quiet, final quality of someone who does not speak often but means every word when they do. "Stop calling it that. It is not a family disagreement. A family disagreement is who gets which holiday. This woman," she looked at me directly, and her eyes were steady. "This woman paid to build the room you put me in. She had a legal right to live there. You removed her from her home, lied to me about why, and involved her own daughter to make it look like she was confused. That is not a family disagreement, Vanessa. That is something else entirely, and I want you to stop calling it what it isn't." The table was very quiet. I looked at Patricia and I felt something unexpected, a kind of recognition. One woman to another, Two mothers in a room where the people they had raised were not measuring up to what they had hoped for. She had not known. She had been used the same way I had been used, just from a different angle, and she was angry about it in the clear way that you are angry when someone has attached your name to something shameful without your permission. "Thank you," I said to her. She nodded once. Then I turned back to the table and I reached into my folder for the last time. What I placed on the table was not another legal document. It was a single sheet of paper handwritten in my own hand, on which I had written 4 decisions. I had written them the night before at my kitchen table, with Samuel's photograph on the mantel and the tea growing cold beside me. I had written them slowly and then read them back to myself twice, the way I read everything twice, and when I had read them the second time, I knew they were right. I placed the sheet in the center of the table and I said, "I am going to tell you what I have decided. I would ask that everyone let me finish before responding." Nobody spoke. "I will not be returning to 412 Wisteria Lane. Not as a resident, not as a guest, not under any arrangement, temporary or otherwise. That chapter is closed." Julian made a sound but kept his word and did not speak. "My financial contribution, $210,000, will be converted to a secured lien against the property, recorded with the county. Julian and Vanessa cannot sell, refinance, or borrow against that property without satisfying the lien. The lien will remain in place until the full amount is repaid. Rachel will file the paperwork this week." Vanessa's hand went to the table. Her fingers spread flat. "I will not be providing any financial support to Lux Event Group. Not a loan, not an investment, not an informal transfer of any kind. If the business cannot resolve its obligations through its own resources, it will close as a consequence of decisions Vanessa made, and it is not mine to absorb." Julian closed his eyes. "And finally, I have restructured my estate. I have worked with Rachel over the past 18 months, yes, 18 months, which should tell everyone at this table that I have been paying attention for longer than any of you realize, to establish an independent trust. That trust protects certain assets for Nia's future education and housing. It does not give Julian, Vanessa, or Simone direct access to or control over any of my remaining assets. If I die tomorrow, an independent trustee manages everything according to terms I have set. No one at this table has a vote." I folded my hands on top of the paper. "I want to be clear that these are not punishments. They are protections. For me and for Nia, who did nothing wrong and deserves to have someone in this family thinking about her future without attaching conditions to it." Vanessa said, "You're destroying this family." "No," I said. "I'm describing what it cost to treat me the way I was treated. Those are different things. Julian could lose the house. Julian could have lost the house because his wife built a business on debt she could not repay. I did not create that risk. I am declining to absorb it. You have more than enough, Vanessa." My voice did not rise. "It did not need to. If I have more than enough, then so do you. The difference is that mine is mine, and what you did over the last several months has ensured, very effectively, that I will never forget that distinction again." Julian opened his eyes. He looked at me with the same expression I had seen when he was a young boy who had broken something he could not fix and was trying to decide whether to say so. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked. "Is there anything, Mom? Is there any version of this where I can make it right?" I thought about that. I thought about it genuinely, the way the question deserved, rather than reaching for an answer I had prepared. "Yes," I said finally, "there is, but I need you to understand something first." He was looking at me fully now. Not at the table, not at Vanessa, not at his hands. At me. "You told me there was no room for me. You said it in a note, taped to the handle of the suitcase your father and I took on our last anniversary trip. I want you to understand what it felt like to read that. Not so you feel worse than you already do, but because if you don't understand what you actually did, not the legal version, not the financial version, but the human version, then whatever you repair will just be the surface." The room was so quiet I could hear the traffic on Drayton Street through the window. "You packed your father's photograph face down," I said. "In a box marked miscellaneous. That is what I need you to understand. Not the money, the photograph." Julian put his face back in his hands, and this time the sound that came out of him was not compressed or controlled or managed. It was the sound of a person who has fully arrived at what they have done, and it is more than they can hold without making a sound. I did not move toward him. I sat with my hands folded and I let him feel it, because some things cannot be managed and should not be, and this was one of them. Simone said, "Mom, I'm sorry." I looked at my daughter. "I know," I said. "I need you to know that I didn't really think you were confused. I never actually believed Simone. I know you didn't believe it. That is not the part that hurt me." She was crying now. Real tears, the unmanaged kind, not the kind she used as argument. "The part that hurt me," I said, "is that you knew I was fine. And you called those women anyway. Knowing I was fine made it worse, not better. If you had actually believed I was losing my mind, that would have been fear. What you did instead was a business decision. And that is the part I am going to have to sit with for a long time." She did not have an answer for that, There was no answer for it. Rachel looked at me, a small look, calibrated, asking without words whether I was ready to close. I have one more thing to say, I told the room. And then Rachel will explain the next legal steps, and you can each decide how you want to respond. Everyone was looking at me. I bought a cottage 18 months ago. It is paid for in full and held in a trust that protects it from any claim or complication. I have savings, investments, and the life insurance Samuel left me. I am not dependent on any arrangement, any relationship, or any goodwill in this room to survive or to live well. I am telling you this not to wound anyone. I am telling you this because the entire plan, the boxes, the locks, the retreat, the calls to my congregation, all of it was built on the assumption that I had given everything away and had nothing left. That I was dependent, that I could be frightened into signing whatever was put in front of me. I picked up the sheet with my 4 decisions and put it back in the blue folder and closed it. You assumed that because I loved you, I must have been emptied by loving you. I need you to understand that those are not the same thing. You can love people completely and still be whole. You can give to your family and still belong to yourself. I learned that from your father, and I am sorry I forgot it for long enough that any of you thought this plan would work. The room held that for a long moment. Then Patricia reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She did not say anything, she just put her hand there, and I let it stay, and for the first time since I had stood in that driveway counting 17 boxes, something in my chest came slightly loose. Vanessa was looking at her mother's hand on mine. Whatever she was feeling, she kept it entirely internal, no expression. No word, just a stillness that I recognized as the stillness of a person who is deciding very quickly what comes next. I had been that person plenty of times. The difference was what you decided, Rachel said. I'll follow up with each of you separately about the legal steps. Julian, you'll want your own representation. Vanessa, the same. I'd advise both of you to take that seriously. She paused. We're finished for today. People gathered their things. There was the sound of chairs moving, papers shuffled, the small, quiet noise of a meeting ending. Patricia squeezed my hand once before she let it go, and then she stood and picked up her handbag and walked to the door without looking at her daughter. Simone left without speaking to me again. I watched her go, and I sat with the particular grief of watching your child walk out of a room as someone you no longer fully recognize. It does not stop hurting just because it is necessary. That is the thing nobody tells you about boundaries. They are not painless. They are just worth the pain. Julian was the last one in the room besides me and Rachel. He stood at the door for a moment with his hand on the frame. He had his back to me. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the held weight of a man who wants to turn around but doesn't know what to do with his face when he does. Then he turned. Mom, he said, Julian, I don't expect anything from you. I want you to know that. I'm not going to ask for anything. He stopped. I'm just glad you have somewhere to go. I'm glad you're not. He couldn't finish the sentence. I'm glad you're okay. I looked at my son standing in the doorway of Rachel's conference room with his eyes red and his jaw tight and 43 years of history between us. I know, I said. He nodded and then he left. Rachel waited until we heard the door to the office close downstairs. Then she set down her pen and looked at me with the plain, direct look of a woman who does not give out compliments lightly. You didn't break once, she said. I had time to practice. How do you feel? I thought about that. I looked at the blue folder on the table in front of me. I thought about the cottage, about Samuel's photograph on the mantel, about Nia coming over on Sunday afternoons with a mystery novel tucked under her arm. I thought about my reading chair that was still on someone's front lawn, or possibly in a storage unit by now, which was fine. I would buy another one later, I said finally. I feel lighter. Rachel smiled, not her professional smile. The other one, the smaller one, the one that belonged to the 61-year-old woman rather than the attorney. Good, she said. Let's get you home. The drive back to the cottage that afternoon took 11 minutes. I know because I counted the traffic lights, 4 of them, all green except the one on Abercorn, which caught me for 90 seconds while a school bus unloaded on the cross street. I sat at that red light and watched a little girl in a yellow backpack jump off the bottom step of the bus and run toward a woman waiting on the sidewalk, and the woman caught her and swung her up and the little girl laughed. And I sat there watching that and felt the full weight of everything that had just happened settle into my body all at once. I did not cry at the red light. I did not cry when I pulled into my driveway. I carried my blue folder inside, set it on the kitchen table, and went to the bathroom and ran cold water over my wrists, the way my mother taught me to do when I was overwhelmed. She said it brought the blood back to the center. Brought you back to yourself. Then I looked at my face in the mirror for a long moment. I looked tired. I looked 68, and underneath both of those things, I looked like someone who had done exactly what she came to do and was still standing. I put Samuel's photograph on the mantel and I said, "We did it, Samuel, we did it." Then I sat down on the couch and I let myself cry for exactly 17 minutes. 1 minute for every box. After that, I washed my face, put the kettle on and called Rachel. It's done, I told her. It's done, she agreed. How are you feeling? Like I need 3 days of sleep and a very good meal. Both of those are reasonable. The lien paperwork will be filed by Thursday. I'll send you copies as soon as it's recorded. Thank you. Rachel, a pause. Then she said in the voice she used when she was speaking as my friend rather than my attorney, Samuel would be proud of you. I held that for a moment without answering. Not because it didn't mean anything, because it meant more than I could answer quickly. I know, I said finally. I think he would. What I did not expect in the days that followed that meeting was the quiet. Not external quiet, the cottage was always quiet. The river sounds and the occasional boat engine and the birds in the mornings. I mean internal quiet. The particular stillness of a mind that has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has finally set it down. I had spent 18 months watching, documenting, preparing, bracing. I had spent the days after the lockout in the sharp, focus mode of a person assembling a case, and then the meeting happened, and the documents landed, and the truth was in the room with everyone who needed to be in the room with it, and then it was simply over. And in the space where all that vigilance had been living, there was just quiet. It took me several days to stop waiting for the next thing to manage. Julian called 4 days after the meeting. He did not open with an explanation or an apology or a question about the lien. He said, Mom, I just wanted to hear your voice. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone and decided whether that was enough to work with. I'm here, I said. I've been thinking about what you said. In the meeting, about the photograph. I know you have. I don't have an excuse for it. I've been trying to find one all week and there isn't one. I want you to know I think about it every day, Julian. Yeah, I believe you. And that matters. But believing that you feel terrible about something is not the same as trusting you again. Those are two different things and I need you to understand the difference. A long silence. Then how do I get to the second one, the trust you show me? Over time, not in one conversation and not with a single gesture. You show me by what you do over the next months and years. There's no shortcut. Okay, he said. Okay, Mom, are you talking to someone? Vanessa and I started couples therapy last week. I'm not asking about Vanessa. I'm asking about you. He was quiet for a moment. I made an appointment for next Tuesday. Good. That's good, Julian. Is it okay if I call? Not to ask for anything, just to talk. I thought about that yellow backpack at the red light. I thought about the woman who caught her daughter and swung her up. I thought about all the ways love persists even when it has been badly handled. The way a plant comes back after a hard winter if the roots were deep enough to begin with. Yes, I said, you can call. That was not forgiveness. I want to be clear about that. Forgiveness, the real kind, the kind that releases both people rather than just the one who did the harm, is not a thing you can arrive at in 4 days or 4 weeks. It is a long process of deciding repeatedly that you are not going to let what someone did to you become the permanent center of your story. I was not there yet. I might not be there for a long time. But allowing my son to call me was not weakness and it was not surrender. It was a door opened very slightly by a woman who still owned the key. Simone did not call. I had expected that. Simone has always retreated when she cannot control the outcome of a confrontation. When she was young and lost an argument, she went to her room and came out 2 days later, acting as if the argument had never happened, as if the sheer passage of time had resolved everything without anyone having to address anything. It was a strategy that had worked on me more often than I wanted to admit. She would disappear into silence. I would feel the absence and eventually I would call her and smooth things over just to restore contact. She was waiting for me to do that now. I did not do it. Not because I did not miss her. I missed my daughter with a specific, particular kind of grief that is different from every other grief I have known, because it is the grief of knowing someone from the very beginning, from before they were born, from the first moment of them, from every age and stage, and then discovering that the person you have known that long is capable of something that reorders everything you thought you understood about them. I missed her, and I let her stay in her silence because chasing her would teach her that the silence worked. That disappearing was a cost I would absorb, that there was no lasting consequence to what she had done. Love without consequences is not love. It is a transaction that only benefits the person doing the taking. So I let the silence be hers. 3 weeks after the meeting, Rachel called me on a Wednesday morning. The lien is recorded, she said. As of 9:47 this morning, Julian and Vanessa cannot sell, refinance, or leverage that property without satisfying the $210,000 obligation. It's done. I sat with that for a moment, and Vanessa's loan application rejected. Without the ability to clear the encumbrance, the bank withdrew the offer. The refinancing is dead. So the business 60 days to find another solution before the bank calls the line of credit. I don't know what they'll do. But whatever it is, it has nothing to do with your money. I looked out at the river. A heron was standing in the shallows near the bank, completely still, looking at the water with the patient focus of something that knows exactly what it is waiting for. Rachel, do you think I was cruel? She was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone who doesn't have an answer, but the silence of someone who is deciding whether to give the real one. No, she said finally, I think you were exact. There's a difference. Cruelty adds extra. You didn't add anything extra. You just stopped absorbing what wasn't yours to absorb. I had been turning that distinction over in my mind since the meeting the line between protection and punishment, between saying this is what this costs and saying I want you to suffer. I had examined every one of my 4 decisions from every angle I could manage, looking for the place where I had crossed from one into the other. I hadn't found it, and Rachel, who would have told me if it was there, was telling me it wasn't there. Okay, I said, thank you. How's the cottage? It's starting to feel like home. Good. That's exactly what it should feel like. What happened next? I did not see coming. 6 days after the lien was recorded, a Tuesday afternoon, late enough that the light was going orange over the river, I heard a knock at my front door. I was not expecting anyone. Rachel always called first. Julian always called first now. I had not heard from Simone. I went to the door and opened it and found Patricia standing on my porch. Vanessa's mother, the woman whose name had been on the decorative sign in my former suite. The woman who had sat in Rachel's conference room and said, clearly and without hesitation, that she would not have agreed to what Vanessa had done if she had known. She was holding a pie, a real pie in a glass dish with a crimped crust edge that someone had made by hand. It was apple. I could smell it from the doorway, cinnamon and brown sugar and something else underneath that I could not immediately name. I looked at her. She looked at me. I didn't know what to bring, she said. Flowers felt wrong. I didn't want to bring wine because I didn't know if you drank. I can bake, so I baked. I stepped back from the door. Come in, Patricia. She came in. She looked around the cottage with careful, respectful eyes, not appraising it, not inventorying it, just taking it in. She set the pie on the kitchen counter and put her hands in the pockets of her coat and looked at Samuel's photograph on the mantel. Is that your husband? That's Samuel. He died 2 years ago. He looks kind. He was the kindest person I have known. She nodded. Then she turned and looked at me with the direct, clear gaze of a woman who has decided to say the thing and is not going to circle it. I came to apologize. I know you didn't do anything to me. So you might wonder what I have to apologize for, but I was used as a reason to hurt you. And even though I didn't know it, my name is on that sign, and I need to say I'm sorry for that. Because someone should. I looked at this woman, 60-something, careful white hair, standing in my kitchen with her hands in her coat pockets, having driven across town to apologize for something she had not done because she could not let the thing go unacknowledged. Sit down, I said. I'll make coffee. We sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours. We talked about our children and about our husbands. Hers had died 8 years earlier. A heart attack, sudden, no warning, and about what it means to be a mother who has done everything she knows how to do and still watches her child make choices that knock the breath out of her. Patricia did not make excuses for Vanessa. She did not explain or rationalize. She said at one point with a precision that reminded me of Rachel, I love my daughter, but I have stopped being surprised by her, and that is its own kind of grief. Yes, I said. I know exactly what you mean. When she left, she hugged me at the door, a real hug, the kind that has weight and intention to it, and she said, you handled yourself in that room like nobody I have ever watched. I want you to know that I held that compliment carefully. I had 40 years of practice, I said. She laughed. A real laugh, clean and unguarded, after she was gone. I sat with the remaining coffee and thought about what it means that the person who came to my door to offer something genuine was not my son, was not my daughter, was not anyone who was obligated to me by blood or history. It was a stranger who had been swept into the edges of something ugly and had walked out of it choosing decency. That meant something. I was not sure exactly what it meant yet, but it meant something. The following Sunday, Nia came. Julian had called the Thursday before and asked carefully whether it would be all right. Not whether he could bring her. He understood without my saying it that he was not in a position to come yet, that there was still too much between us that needed time to settle, but whether Nia could visit, whether her grandmother still wanted to see her. The fact that he had to ask that question told me something about how far things had fallen. And the fact that he asked it, instead of assuming, told me something about what the therapy might already be doing. Of course I want to see her, I said. Nia has nothing to do with any of this. She knows something happened. She's been asking questions. What have you told her? That Grandma needed her own space. That sometimes adults need to make changes, and it doesn't mean anyone is angry at her. That was better than I expected from him. Good, that's the right thing to tell her. She misses you. I miss her too. Julian, Sunday afternoon, 2 o'clock. He brought her to the door at 2 o'clock exactly and then drove away without coming inside, because he understood. Nia stood on my porch with a backpack over one shoulder and a library book in her hand, and she looked at me the way 10-year-olds look at things they are not certain about, with that particular combination of wanting something and not knowing if it is safe to want it. Then I opened my arms and she walked into them and held on tight for a long time without saying anything. When she let go, she looked up at me and said, "Your house is really pretty." "Grandma, thank you, baby. I picked it out myself." "Did you pick the blue door?" "I picked everything." She thought about that for a moment. Then she nodded, satisfied, and came inside. I had made her a bedroom. It was small. The second bedroom of the cottage was not large, but I had put up the white quilt she had always liked, the one from the guest room in the old house, and there was a reading lamp on the nightstand, and 2 shelves that I had stocked with the mystery novels she loved, the ones with girl detectives who solve things their adults overlook. When she saw it, her whole face changed. "This is mine for when you visit." "Yes." She walked in and touched the spine of each book on the shelf, slowly, one by one, the way readers touch books, not just seeing them but greeting them. Then she sat down on the edge of the bed and looked around the room with an expression I could not entirely read. "Grandma?" "Yes, sweetheart. Are you going to be okay?" The question landed with the full, unfiltered weight of a child who asks what she actually means because she has not yet learned to dress questions up in polite language. I sat down beside her on the bed. "I'm going to be more than okay," I said. "I'm going to be fine, but I appreciate you asking. Dad cries sometimes at night. He thinks I can't hear." I sat with that for a moment. "Your dad made some mistakes," I said carefully, "and sometimes when we know we've made mistakes, we feel sad about them. That's actually a good sign. It means he cares. Are you going to forgive him?" 10 years old, with a library book in her lap and her grandmother's quilt under her hands, and she was asking me the question that took most adults a lifetime to work up to. "I'm working on it," I said honestly. "Forgiveness takes time sometimes. But I love your dad and I love you, and those things don't change." She thought about that. Then she leaned her head against my shoulder. "I love you too." "Grandma," we stayed like that for a while. The afternoon light came through the window, and the river sounds came through the walls, and there was nothing in that room that was complicated or painful or requiring management. There was just my granddaughter's weight against my shoulder and the simple, uncomplicated truth of being loved by someone who has not yet learned to love conditionally. Later, we made cookies. She stood on the footstool I had bought specifically because I knew she would be here, because I had thought about her every time I bought something for this house, and she stirred the batter with the focused intensity she brought to everything. And she told me about her teacher and a book report she was writing, and a girl at school who had done something complicated that Nia was still working out how to feel about. I listened to every word. I asked questions. I did not offer solutions she did not ask for. When Julian came to the door at 5 o'clock, Nia was still eating a cookie. He waited on the porch without knocking. I went to the door and he looked at me with the face of a man who is very carefully not asking for more than he has been given. "She has a good afternoon. She always does," I said. "She's a remarkable child, Julian. Whatever else has gone wrong, you raised a remarkable child." Something in his face shifted. Not dramatic, not with great visible emotion, but in the small, internal way that a person shifts when they have been told something true that they needed to hear. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I'll see her next Sunday." He nodded. Then he said, "I started a repayment schedule. I know Rachel would handle it formally, but I wanted to bring it to you myself. Is that okay? Send it to Rachel. She'll review it." Of course, he hesitated. "Mom, I know this isn't," he stopped, tried again. "I know I don't get to rush this. I just want to say that I'm not going to stop trying to make it right. I'm not going to stop." I looked at my son on my porch in the late afternoon light. "I know," I said, and I meant it, not as forgiveness and not as permission, but as acknowledgement. "I know you mean that, and I am watching, and what you do next will tell me whether it is true." He took Nia's hand when she appeared at the door with her backpack and her library book. She hugged me again at the door, long and hard, and then she skipped down the porch steps with the uncomplicated energy of a child who had been thoroughly loved for an afternoon and had nowhere to put the excess of it except into movement. I watched them drive away. Then I went inside and sat down at my kitchen table and opened the notebook where I had been writing things down, not legal documents, not evidence, just thoughts, observations, the things that occur to you in the quiet moments that you do not want to lose. And I wrote down what Nia had asked me. "Are you going to be okay?" and what I had answered. "More than okay, fine." And then underneath it I wrote something else. Not for anyone who might read it someday, just for me. In the way you write things for yourself when you need to see them outside your own head to know whether they are true. I wrote, "I spent 40 years reviewing other people's decisions to protect them from consequences they hadn't anticipated. I spent my whole marriage making sure our family was safe from things they never even knew to be afraid of. I gave my children everything I had, and then I gave them a little more, the way good mothers do, the way I was taught good mothers do, the way I believed good mothers do. And when they took the most I had ever given, when they put it in boxes and changed the locks and left me in a driveway, counting, I did not fall apart. I did not beg. I did not accept any version of events that erased what I knew to be true. And that is not because I am hard or cold or because I love my children less than I should. It is because Samuel spent 41 years teaching me, by example, that the most loving thing you can do for the people in your life is refuse to be destroyed by them. That your survival is not selfishness. That a woman who has nothing left has nothing left to give. I am not nothing. I have never been nothing. I put down the pen. I looked at Samuel's photograph on the mantel. The afternoon had gone gold and the river light was coming through the window at an angle, and the cottage was quiet around me in the way that only a place you truly own can be quiet. I thought about Patricia with her apple pie and her apology that no one had asked for. I thought about Nia's head on my shoulder and the particular weight of being loved by someone who does not yet know how to love with conditions. I thought about Julian on the porch saying I'm not going to stop, and the way I had believed him, not completely, not without reservation, but enough to leave the door not entirely closed. I thought about Simone in her silence, waiting for me to fill it. I was not going to fill it, but I was going to leave room for her to end it if she chose to. That was the most I could do and the least she deserved, and I was at peace with both of those things being true at the same time. What I had done in that conference room, the documents, the agreements, the 4 decisions I had laid out in my own handwriting, none of it was revenge. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. Revenge is about making someone feel what you felt. What I had done was about making sure I never felt it again. Those are completely different motivations, and they lead to completely different outcomes. Revenge burns down the house, protection builds a new one. I had built a new one. It had a blue front door and a bedroom with a white quilt for my granddaughter, and a mantel where Samuel's photograph stood upright, facing the room. No one had a key to this house but me. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt exactly like what it was. Not loneliness, not isolation, not the absence of something. It felt like the presence of something I had not had in so long I had forgotten it had a name. Safety chosen on my own terms, belonging to no one else. Mine. Lux Event Group closed on a Wednesday. I know because Rachel called me that morning. Not because she had to, but because she thought I should hear it from her before I heard it from anyone else. The business filing was public record. The closure notice had gone to the county clerk the previous afternoon. Vanessa had signed the dissolution paperwork herself. How's Julian? I asked. According to his attorney, he's already picked up additional contract work. He sold the truck last week, the black F-250. The one he had bought the year Vanessa's business was doing well. The year everything looked like it was going to keep going up. I thought about that truck, and what it had represented to him, the visible proof of a life that was working, and I felt something that was not satisfaction, and was not grief, but was somewhere in the complicated territory between them. And the house, they're keeping it. With the lien in place and the repayment schedule, they can manage the mortgage. It'll be tight, but they can manage. That's what I wanted. I know it is. I stood at my kitchen window after I hung up and looked at the river for a long time. I had not wanted Vanessa's business to fail. I want to be clear about that, because I think the easier story, the more satisfying story, maybe would be one where I wanted precisely this outcome and felt righteous watching it happen. But that is not the truth. The truth is that I had not wanted to destroy anything. I had wanted to stop being the thing that other people built their plans on top of without asking. There is a difference between those two things, a significant one. What I felt that Wednesday morning looking at the river was not triumph. It was something quieter and more durable than triumph. It was the feeling of a woman who drew a line and held it, and then watched the consequences settle on the people who had crossed it, and understood that the consequences were not hers to carry. Not this time. I put the kettle on. I had things to do. I had started volunteering with the Coastal Georgia Senior Advocacy Network 6 weeks after the meeting in Rachel's office. A woman named Doris Tatum ran it out of a community center on Waters Avenue, and she had the organized, no-nonsense energy of someone who had spent decades watching older adults get taken advantage of and had decided that knowing about it without doing something about it was its own kind of failure. Doris had heard about me through Rachel, which meant she had heard a version of my story that was accurate but diplomatic, which meant she had probably filled in the rest herself and was too polite to say so. When I walked into her office the first time, she looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "Rachel tells me you know your way around a legal document. I spent 40 years in compliance." Good. I have 17 people this month who are about to sign things they don't understand. That was all the interview I got. I went every Tuesday and Thursday. Sometimes I reviewed documents, deed transfers, power of attorney forms, living arrangements, financial agreements that had been written by someone else's attorney and handed to a 73-year-old man with a magnifying glass and 48 hours to decide. Sometimes I just talked with people. Sat across from them at a folding table in a community center room that smelled like industrial cleaner and coffee, and listened to them describe situations that sounded, in their essential shape, like mine. A woman whose son had asked her to add him to the title of her home for convenience. a man whose daughter was managing his finances because he had given her power of attorney after a hospital stay, and who had recently noticed that his account balances were not what he expected them to be. A woman who had moved in with her son and daughter-in-law and was being told, a year later, that she was welcome to stay, but perhaps it would be easier for everyone if she contributed more to the household expenses, and perhaps also signed a document that simplified the property records. I did not tell any of them my story. It was not my place to make their situations about me. But I told them what I knew, and what I knew was this: love is not a legal document, and legal documents are not love, and the two should never be confused for each other. You can love your children completely and still have a recorded agreement. You can trust your family and still protect yourself. Those things are not contradictions, they are wisdom, and wisdom that arrives after a mistake is still wisdom, but wisdom that arrives before one is the kind that keeps you whole. One Tuesday morning, a woman named Gloria came in. She was 71, sharp and funny, with grandchildren she talked about constantly. Her son had recently asked her to sell her house and contribute the proceeds to help him purchase a larger property where she could have her own suite. She was thinking about saying yes. She laid out all the reasons. He was a good son, she trusted him, she had been widowed 2 years earlier, and the house was too big. Her granddaughter would be nearby. The arrangement made financial sense. I listened to all of it. I did not interrupt. When she finished, I said, those are all real reasons, and they might be exactly right. But before you say yes, I want to ask you something, okay? If the arrangement stopped working, if something changed, if your son's circumstances changed, if his wife's circumstances changed, what would you have? Gloria looked at me. I'd have my family, she said. Yes, and would that be enough? She was quiet for a long time. What are you saying? I'm saying that love is not a housing plan. I'm saying that if you do this, you need a recorded legal agreement that protects your contribution and guarantees your right to remain. Not because your son will hurt you, but because you deserve to be protected in the same way you would protect him. Because your security should not depend entirely on things continuing to go well. She looked at me with the careful look of someone who is hearing something they half already know. Did something happen to you? She asked. Something happened to me, I said. And I was prepared for it. That preparation made the difference between a tragedy and an inconvenience. She thought about that. Then she said, will you help me draft something? That's what I'm here for. I thought about Gloria that Wednesday morning when Rachel called about Vanessa's business. I thought about the 17 people Doris had mentioned on my first day, and all the people after them, and what it meant to sit across a table from someone who was about to make the same kind of vulnerable, hopeful choice I had made and give them the information that might protect them from the version of events I had lived through. That was not nothing, that was in fact quite a lot. My phone buzzed while I was standing at the window. A text from a number I did not recognize. I almost didn't open it. I opened it. It was from Simone. It said, I know I don't have the right to ask for anything. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, not to get something back. Just because it's true and I should have said it sooner. I'm sorry, Mom. I read it 4 times. Then I set the phone on the counter and finished making my tea and sat down at the kitchen table and let myself feel the full, complicated weight of those words, not just the apology itself, but everything it had taken: weeks of silence, weeks of whatever private reckoning had been happening inside my daughter while she sat in her apartment and lived with what she had agreed to do to produce a text message that asked for nothing in return. Simone had never in her adult life apologized without a secondary agenda. She apologized and then asked for things. She apologized and then waited for the apology to become currency she could spend on getting back to where she'd been before she'd made the mistake. That was her pattern, as reliable and predictable as the tide. This text asked for nothing. I sat with my tea and I thought about what that might mean. Whether it meant she had changed or whether she had simply run out of asks. Whether the silence of the previous weeks had been genuine reckoning or just the long exhale of a woman who had finally accepted that her usual strategy wasn't going to work this time. I did not know, and I decided, sitting at that table, that not knowing was acceptable, that I could hold uncertainty about my daughter's intentions without needing to resolve it immediately, that I could acknowledge the text without granting amnesty, could open a crack in the door without flinging it wide, could be my mother's daughter without forgetting what being my daughter had cost me. I picked up the phone. I typed, "Thank you for saying that. I mean it, give me some time." I sent it. Then I put the phone face down on the table and finished my tea. 5 months after the meeting in Rachel's office, Julian drove up to my cottage on a Saturday morning. He called first. He always called first now, and said he needed to bring me something and he wanted to do it in person. I said, "Come at 10. He arrived at 9:57. He was alone. He had a manila envelope in one hand and a small plant in the other, a potted rosemary, the kind you can keep on a kitchen windowsill, because he knew I had left my rosebush at the house on Wisteria Lane and could not take it with me. I do not know how long it took him to think of that. I do not know whether it was his idea or his therapist's. What I know is that he stood on my porch holding a rosemary plant and a manila envelope and looked at me with the face of a man who had spent 5 months learning, slowly and painfully, what accountability actually feels like when you're not trying to negotiate your way out of it. "Come in," I said. He put the rosemary on the kitchen windowsill. I noticed he chose the spot with the most light, which meant he had thought about that too. Then he put the envelope on the table and sat down. "Open it," he said. Inside was a repayment schedule. 6 pages, precise, with monthly amounts and projected completion dates, and a letter from his bank confirming the arrangement. The first payment had already been made. I could see the confirmation attached to the back. He had not waited to hand me the schedule before making the first payment. He had made the payment and then brought me the schedule, which meant he had done the thing before asking me to acknowledge it. That was new. I read every page. He sat across from me and did not rush me and did not explain anything I had not asked him to explain. He just waited, the way a person waits when they understand that patience is not something they get to ask for, it is something they have to demonstrate. When I finished, I put the pages back in the envelope and folded my hands on top of it. "This is good, Julian. I know it's going to take time. It is. I'm not expecting it to change anything overnight." Rachel made sure I understood that. "Good." He looked at his hands. Then he looked up. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask. Did you know? Before everything happened, did you know it was coming?" I thought about how to answer that. About the 18 months of watching and documenting and preparing. About the email I had heard through the floor. About the change fee and the extended retreat and Simone's calls to the church women. "I knew something was building," I said. "I didn't know exactly what. But I had enough to know that I needed to be ready, and you were ready." "I was." He was quiet for a moment. I keep thinking about you at that airport. Calling me, standing at the curb." He stopped. His jaw was working. "And I just let it go to voicemail. I knew it was you. I let it go to voicemail because I didn't want to have to talk to you before you got there. Julian, I'm not saying it to make you feel sorry for me. I'm saying it because I need you to know that I know exactly what I did. I know every part of it." I looked at my son, at the lines around his eyes that had deepened in 5 months, at the way his hands were holding each other on the table, not the hands of a man trying to manage a situation, but the hands of a man who has stopped trying to manage things and is just trying to hold himself together. "I know you know," I said. "Does that help at all?" I thought about that genuinely. Whether knowing that he knew made any difference to the thing that had happened. Whether his awareness of the airport, of the voicemail, of the luggage and the locks and Samuel's photograph, changed the fact of any of it. "It doesn't undo it," I said. "But it matters. A person who doesn't know what they did can't change. A person who knows has a chance." He nodded. He was not going to cry in my kitchen. I could see him managing that, but it was close. "Nia wants to come next Sunday," he said. "She's always welcome. She told her teacher about you. About your work at the advocacy center. Her teacher asked if you'd come speak to the class sometime. They're doing a unit on, I don't remember exactly, something about community and older generations." I sat with that for a moment. My 10-year-old granddaughter had told her teacher about what I did. "Tell her teacher yes," I said. Julian almost smiled. "Not quite, but almost." He left 30 minutes later with the envelope signed and dated where Rachel had indicated. He paused at the door, the blue door, which he had never said anything about, and looked at it for a moment. "You always liked blue," he said. "Your father's favorite color." He nodded. Then he went. I stood at the window and watched his car, not the F-250, a smaller sedan now, sensible and modest, pull out of the driveway and disappear down the road. And I felt something that I had not expected to feel on the morning that the first repayment check arrived, and my son walked out of my cottage, having done the right thing for the first time in longer than I wanted to calculate. I felt proud of him, not the way you are proud of someone who has done something extraordinary, the way you are proud of someone who has done something hard, who has looked at the gap between who they were and who they should be and decided to close it, slowly without fanfare, one payment and one honest conversation and one rosemary plant at a time. I was not going to tell him that, not yet. Some things need time to become real before you name them out loud. But I felt it. 2 weeks later, I went to Nia's classroom. 12, 9, and 10-year-olds in a room that smelled like pencil shavings and someone's lunch, all of them looking at me with the frank, unfiltered attention that children give to things they are actually curious about. Nia sat in the 3rd row. She had her hands folded on her desk, and she was watching me the way she had watched me cook 100 times, with the specific concentration of someone taking notes. The teacher introduced me and said I was a community volunteer and a retired hospital compliance officer and Nia's grandmother. Nia sat up a little straighter at the last part. I told them what I did. I told them in language that 12 children could follow, about the work of helping older adults understand documents before they signed them, about what it meant to read carefully, to ask questions, to know that you had the right to take your time, about how the most important thing you could do for yourself and the people you loved was to stay informed. One child, a boy in the front row with red sneakers, raised his hand. What happens if someone tries to trick you? You find out, I said. You look at the evidence, you talk to someone you trust. And you don't panic, because panic makes you sign things you shouldn't sign. What if you don't have anyone to trust? I looked at this child with his red sneakers and his direct, uncomplicated question, and I thought about Gloria in the community center room. I thought about the man with the power of attorney and the dwindling account balances. I thought about the 17 people Doris had mentioned on my first day, and all the people since. Then you come find us, I said. That's why we're there. After class, Nia walked with me to the parking lot. She was quiet for most of the walk, the kind of quiet that means a child is working something out. Grandma. Yes, when I'm old like a grown-up. Can I call you if I have a document I don't understand? I stopped walking. I looked at my granddaughter, 10 years old, with her grandmother's stubbornness and her grandfather's eyes, asking me whether she could call me for help when she was a grown woman navigating a complicated world. Yes, I said, you can always call me, she nodded, satisfied, and kept walking. That night, the last thing I did before I went to bed was write in my notebook. Not evidence, not plans, not things to document, just thoughts. I wrote about Samuel, about the 41 years of a marriage that had taught me more about protecting myself than any compliance manual ever had. Because he had lived it, he had showed me what it looked like to be careful and generous at the same time, to give people your whole heart without giving them the lock to your door. I had forgotten some of that in the grief. I had let myself become porous with loss, and the people around me had noticed, and some of them had decided that porousness was opportunity. I wrote about the blue folder, about what it had meant to carry it not as a weapon, never as a weapon, but as the physical proof that I had not been imagining things, that the patterns I had seen were real, that my instincts were intact. 40 years of compliance work had given me a tool, and the tool had worked. I wrote about Rachel, who had said years ago that a prepared person is a calm person, and who had proved it true by standing in that conference room and placing 8 pages and a county recording stamp on the table, with the steady confidence of a woman who already knew what was going to happen next. I wrote about Patricia and her apple pie and her apology that nobody had asked for, and what it had meant to have someone walk through my door, offering something simple and honest in the middle of a season that had been full of complicated and hidden things. I wrote about Simone and what I had texted her, give me some time, and whether that was the right answer. I decided it was, not because I had forgiven her, and not because I expected things between us to return to what they had been, but because give me some time is the most honest sentence I know. It does not promise more than it can deliver. It does not close the door, and it does not fling it open. It just says I am still here and I need the thing that cannot be hurried. And then I wrote the last thing, the thing that had been sitting in me since the morning I unlocked the blue door for the first time and carried Samuel's photograph to the mantel and stood in the silence of a house that belonged entirely to me. I wrote, for most of my life I believed that being a good mother meant making room for everyone else first. That love was demonstrated by how much you gave and how little you kept. That to need anything for yourself was somehow a failure of the women who had raised me, of the faith I had kept, of the family I had built. My son packed my belongings and told me there was no room for me. And I went home, not to his home, to mine, a home I had quietly, carefully built for myself while I was still loving everyone else. And what I understand now, standing on the other side of all of it, is this: loving your family and protecting yourself are not opposing forces. They never were. I had simply been taught to treat them that way, and the lesson had cost me years of smallness, of making myself less, of giving ground I should have held. The women who raised me, my mother, her mother before her, they gave everything, and they were beautiful and strong, and I loved them and I learned from them. But I want to be the woman who adds something to what they gave me. Who takes their strength and adds the one thing they never quite got to keep, the right to take up space without apology, the right to have a door that is mine, the right to say this belongs to me and mean it without guilt. I closed the notebook. I looked at Samuel's photograph on the mantel. In the lamplight, he looked the way he always had, like someone about to say something that would make me laugh, like someone who knew exactly how the story was going to go and was enjoying waiting for me to catch up. I figured it out, I told him. The cottage was quiet around me. Not the held breath quiet of Julian's house, not the grief-soaked quiet of the house after he died. The clean, honest, earned quiet of a place where I had arrived by my own design. I turned off the lamp, I went to bed, I slept. Some people lose their footing when the people they love betray them. They spend years trying to find solid ground again, looking for it in forgiveness that comes too soon, or in anger that stays too long, or in the exhausting work of pretending nothing happened because the alternative is too difficult. I did not lose my footing, and the reason I did not was not that I was stronger than other women, or colder or less affected. I was affected. I cried for 17 minutes in the cottage on the first night, and I cried more in the weeks that followed, alone in the way you cry when no one needs you to be composed. The reason I did not lose my footing was simpler than strength. It was preparation. It was 40 years of reading carefully. It was Rachel's voice on the phone saying, "Do you still have your copies?" And the blue folder that held them. It was a cottage with a blue door and a mantel that already had a place for Samuel's photograph before any of this began. My son told me there was no room for me. What he had not understood, what none of them had understood, was that I had spent my entire life creating rooms. I had created rooms for my husband and my children and my grandchild and my grief and my faith and my work. I had furnished those rooms and kept them warm and made sure everyone inside them had what they needed. At 68 years old, standing in a driveway counting boxes, I finally understood that I had earned the right to build a room for myself. Not instead of the others, alongside them, in a house where no one could change the locks. I built it, I live in it, it is mine, and that is not the end of a sad story. That is the beginning of the only one that was ever really mine to tell.